The State Conservation Commission was established by the Kansas Legislature in 1937 as a result of the Dust Bowl to promote soil and water conservation. The Division of Conservation was established in 2011 by an executive reorganization order to transition the State Conservation Commission into the Kansas Department of Agriculture and create the Division of Conservation. The Division of Conservation receives guidance from the State Conservation Commission, which now acts as an advisory board and consists of 9 members, with 5 elected commissioners from the 5 different conservation areas around our state, 2 ex officio members from the Kansas State University Extension and Research, and 2 appointed members, 1 from the Kansas Department of Agriculture and 1 from the United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service. The Division of Conservation has the responsibility to administer the Conservation District Law, the Watershed District Act, and other statutes authorizing our various programs. The Division of Conservation implements programs in partnership with the 105 county conservation districts across the state and the 85 organized watershed districts, along with other local, state, and federal entities to achieve the objectives of the Kansas Water Vision. One partnership that I would like to point out is with a group that has deemed themselves the Kansas Conservation Partnership, and those members are from the United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, the Kansas State Conservation Commission, the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation, and then another very important organization, the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Employee Organization. Working together and with conservation districts across the state is a very powerful tool for our state. In furtherance of our mission statement, we've listed a set of objectives for the division that our programs seek to enhance and implement. Those objectives are to protect federal reservoirs and other public water supplies from pollutants and siltation, to reduce flood damage, to reduce pollutants into our water bodies to achieve the water quality standards and meet the terms of our total maximum daily loads. We seek to improve the health of stream riparian areas. We also seek to improve soil health and reduce soil erosion. We seek to improve wildlife habitat and aquatic species across the state. And we seek to reduce the consumptive use of groundwater supplies in the High Plains Aquifer to sustain and preserve agricultural, industrial, and municipal water supplies. The Division of Conservation implements programs to meet these objectives. I would like to draw everyone's attention to my presentation slides now as I share some key details about the programs that the division implements. Our first program is our Aid to Conservation Districts program. This program provides matching funds to effectively deliver local, state, and federal natural resource conservation programs. These funds are matched with funding from counties across the state. This funding, when pooled together between the county and state funding, allows conservation districts to hire staff, both in management, administrative, and technical capacities. It allows those staff to then coordinate the various conservation programs. It allows those conservation districts to implement our state financial assistance programs at the local level. And I think this is key. Our conservation district staff across the state are our front lines in working with farmers and ranchers every day to implement these conservation programs. Another critical component of Conservation District staff's work is to carry out information and education campaigns promoting voluntary conservation. That Conservation District staff also provides clerical assistance to NRCS to meet the local operating agreements that we have in place. Our conservation districts co-locate with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in 101 of the 105 counties in Kansas. And so those USDA service centers are the home for conservation districts for almost all conservation districts across the state. Each conservation district is governed by a local 5-member board. These members are termed district supervisors. They are elected public officials, and they do serve without pay. The 525 district supervisors from across the state donate nearly 50,000 hours per year in furtherance of conservation efforts in Kansas. One of our key programs is our Water Resources Cost Share Program. The Water Resources Program has a goal to protect public water supplies across the state by reducing sedimentation, nutrient, pesticide, and bacteria loading to water bodies, and to reduce aquifer level decline. The practices that are funded from this program focus on the water resource concerns in each county, whether those be surface water or groundwater related. Likewise, another key statewide program is our non-point source pollution control program. The goals for this program center on water quality protection and restoration, particularly in watersheds that have total maximum daily load documents. Practices in this program focus on increasing soil health, reducing sediment and nutrient runoff. One of the key components of this program is that it helps to support information and education activities across the state, both for local conservation districts to host workshops and field days, and also provides funding for scholarships for producers from across the state for educational opportunities such as No-Till on the Plains Winter Conference and our Soil Health U annual conference. Transitioning now to some of our water conservation programs. One program that's been quite popular has been our Water Right Transition Assistance Program, or WATER TAP. The purpose of this program is to retire water rights in high priority areas. Right now, this program is focused in the Rattlesnake Creek watershed in south central Kansas, the Prairie Dog Creek watershed in northwest Kansas, and in the local enhanced management areas within GMD4 in northwest Kansas. One of the key tenets of the Water Tap program is that dry land farming is permitted immediately on the acres in which we retire the water rights. A similar program that we operate in conjunction with the federal government is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. This program is focused in the upper Arkansas River watershed, and we are at the present trying to make that program available in the Rattlesnake Creek watershed as well. This program, in partnership with USDA, seeks to permanently retire the water rights on this land, and then to enter into a Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, program for a contract life that will allow for the planting of permanent vegetation on these acres for the life of the contract. Those contracts are usually 14 or 15 years in nature, and the landowner receives an annual rental payment from the Farm Service Agency. Our state funds are used for a one-time sign-up incentive payment to retire the water rights. Another very exciting program that we offer is our Irrigation Technology Program. As groundwater declines continue, producers are becoming more and more interested in implementing innovative tools to improve irrigation efficiency, which allows them to then reduce water use. The funding in this program is used to provide cost share assistance to landowners, primarily for irrigation technology such as moisture probes. We also think there's a real opportunity in the future to help producers utilize technology to make sure all those devices are connected, where they can then manage those different devices and those different technologies that they have from the palm of their hand. This program is currently focused on the Rattlesnake Creek watershed to address the water right impairment issue with surrounding Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. We also focus this program in those local enhanced management areas and water conservation areas across the state. A very interesting program that we offer is our riparian and wetland protection program. The goal of this program is to enhance, protect, and restore stream banks, stream riparian areas, wetlands, and associated wildlife habitats by providing technical, educational, and financial assistance to landowners and to the general public. Practices that we implement with this program include such practices as small-scale stream bank stabilization, utilizing some tree revetment methodologies, riparian tree plantings, and wetland restoration. And I think it's important to point out that those wetland restorations also include our playa lakes in the western portions of the state. Associated with this program is our large-scale stream bank stabilization program. This program exists to reduce sediment loads above federal reservoirs, particularly the Tuttle Creek, John Redmond, and Perry reservoirs. The primary objective of this program is to benefit water storage, but we also see benefits to protect farmland and to reestablish those important riparian forest communities. This program is implemented with help from an interagency stream bank team, representatives from the Kansas Water Office, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation. And this provides a consistent and efficient process to implement these large-scale stream bank projects. A program that is very important to us is our sediment and nutrient or reduction or buffer program. This program provides state incentives that supplement federal payments. Again, this program is often used in conjunction with the Conservation Reserve Program. And this program encourages the establishment of riparian forest buffers and vegetative filter strips. Our state funding allows for a one-time incentive payment of either $225 per acre in our Tier 1 areas along some of our major rivers, or $162.50 per acre in our Tier 2 areas, and those Tier 2 areas are focused more on the smaller streams. This program is currently targeted in the Milford Reservoir watershed to try and deal with some of the harmful algal bloom issues that we see in Milford. And it's also eligible in other high priority watersheds above federal reservoirs around the state. A very popular program that we run through the division is our watershed dam construction program. This program provides financial assistance to watershed districts, drainage districts, and other special purpose districts around the state to reduce the impacts of flooding. This program was created by the legislature in 1977 for the creation of new dams. However, in 2006, an additional goal was added for this program to be able to help rehabilitate existing flood control dams. And we see at current that most all of the funding is used to rehabilitate those existing structures. And we have a lot of aging structures out there across the state that need some form of rehabilitation. I think one important note to point out is that these flood control dams can also provide emergency water source during severe droughts. And then finally today, two programs that have not received any funding from the state water plan in the past few years, but I think are still very important to our state and certainly warrant being a part of this discussion, is our water supply restoration program, which provides financial assistance to public water supplies to restore these public water supply systems. And again, what we're really seeing through this program is when dams in water supply reservoirs have issues, this program has been able to help a number of those municipalities bring those dams up to standard. Likewise, our multi-purpose small lakes program tries to essentially do the same type of work. Financial assistance is provided to a sponsor, whoever really owns these structures. These multi-purpose lakes, as the name suggests, provide flood protection, public water supply storage, and recreational opportunities. It's very difficult for me to talk about the level of interest in these programs, as there's been no funding in a handful of years. We do know back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe that we had as many as 10 or 15 municipalities contacting us each year about providing financial assistance to help them rehabilitate these types of structures. So a little bit about our organizational structure of the Division of Conservation. As the Director of the Division of Conservation, I report to the Secretary of Agriculture, who in turn reports to the Governor. Within the division, I have 5 program managers who oversee the various programs that we've just talked about. And those 5 program managers all report to me as the Director. The Division of Conservation has 2 additional professional staff members and 1 administrative assistant, for a total of 9 FTEs in the division. The budget of the Division of Conservation is funded by a mix of state general fund, state water plan funding, user fees, and federal grants. The breakdown of our funding is listed in the table below. One thing that I would point out when looking at our budget is that at times with our voluntary conservation programs, we can see some fairly significant carryover from state fiscal year to the next. This is simply part of the nature of implementing voluntary conservation programs. I do not feel that those carryover balances are due to a lack of effort or judgment on the part of the division. It really is more of a factor that lends itself towards particular contracts with producers. And we know that with our voluntary conservation programs, certainly the weather plays a huge factor in how we're able to implement those practices on the ground each year. So that carryover funding does become very important to us to be able to retain that funding. We do have a very good plan on how to implement that funding in a very effective and efficient way. And so with that, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to be here this morning and present this information to you. And I'm happy to stand for any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you for the information, the presentation. Committee, questions? Representative Orr.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon. Appreciate the report. Several questions here. Who determines what programs that you attempt to implement? You talked about the implementation of numerous programs.
Yes, sir. So, the programs that we currently implement, I believe, have been authorized by the Kansas Legislature for the Department of Agriculture to implement those programs. We receive, again, funding for most all of those programs from the state water plan. And so it's really that water plan funding each year that determines the amount of conservation that we're able to implement with each of the programs. But again, I believe the authority for our programs all comes from the Kansas Legislature.
then I assume that you set the objectives, or do you think does someone outside set the objectives? Confused there.
Yes, sir. You know, all of our programs seek to implement the Kansas Water Vision, and through the process that has been established with feedback from regional advisory committees to the Kansas Water Authority, there are certainly a process to how priorities are determined to meet the objectives of the Kansas Water Vision. And again, there is some latitude on the finer details of program implementation that does fall to the Division of Conservation. But there is a larger process, I think, for this day.
Explain that process to me. That's where I'm coming from. I don't understand the process.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, and it is a complicated process. So again, we have county conservation districts in all 105 counties in Kansas. They essentially are the end users of this process. But the process really begins with groups that have been convened by the Kansas Water Office that have been called regional advisory committees. And these committees, I believe there are 14 committees in the different areas as deemed by the Water Office across the state. These committees meet regularly to talk about the regional water resource-related issues in that region, and then they provide recommendations to the Kansas Water Authority. The Kansas Water Authority is then charged with, really trying to prioritize amongst those regional advisory committee recommendations. They also, due to their membership being quite well versed in water issues across the state, bring forth their own recommendations as well. And then they submit a budget recommendation to the governor for those state water plan funds. Once that recommendation is made to the governor, of course, the governor's recommendation to the legislature appropriates funding to the agencies, and that's really where our agency takes the funding for these programs, works with our local, other state and federal partners, and tries to implement these programs most effectively on the ground.
Okay, I want you to understand, I'm not trying to trick you here. Years ago, I served on the SCS board before you were a conservation district. That goes way back. I never did understand the process. You talked about what role the district supervisors provide. And back in my day, I think they provided basically nothing, but I would be interested in your opinion today.
Yeah, and I think that's still a concern, to be quite honest with you. I think that we see a disconnect between the local implementation of our conservation districts. I laid out the process, just a moment ago in kind of a linear fashion. What I've tried to do with conservation districts is understand that it's not a linear process, it's a circular process. And there has to be a feedback mechanism in which the districts understand, and this is difficult. Again, as you know, these district supervisors are volunteers. They do not spend a tremendous amount of time studying the water resource related issues around the state of Kansas. But they do have very important local knowledge on how to get these practices implemented on the ground. They have the relationships with producers in their counties that help advocate for the practices and programs that we try to implement. But I do believe it's very important that all that are involved in this, what I hope to be a more circular process, understand the goals and objectives, and then also understand the difficulties and the challenges in implementing those practices on the ground. And quite frankly, I feel that it's my job to do much better than we maybe have previously done in making sure that everyone involved understands that process.
I'm not trying to be critical here at all. I just don't understand the process. And then this is a trick question, I guess. What in the process would you really like to see changed?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I'm trying to.
And again, if I could wave my magic wand.
Yes, exactly.
I would go back to that first program that I touched on, our Aid to Conservation Districts program. I think one of the things that we have seen over time is that, as budgets have shrunk, it's been difficult to provide adequate funding to our conservation districts across the state. And essentially, the chain of events that starts is that, we're able to, not pay those conservation district managers, what they probably should be paid. We're not able to offer them any type of benefits. And due to that, we find it difficult to attract and retain qualified personnel. And so, when we are out there paying conservation district managers, $14 an hour and providing no benefits, we see a tremendous amount of turnover. And it's very hard to, when you're training a new person every other year, to get them to fully understand this very complicated process that we're engaged in and how the local conservation districts really are a mechanism of how we implement the state water vision, the state water plan. And so, again, if I could wave my magic wand, it would be to increase the capacity of those local conservation districts, both to implement programs on the ground, but also to better engage with others in this process of determining what these state priorities are, really being seen as a true partner to the state. And so, again, it's a challenge because, we certainly, sit here and we look at the budget, we know what the reality is, but, increased funding for conservation districts is one aspect that could very much help close the loop on that system and make that feedback mechanism, in my opinion, work much more efficiently.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate your candidness, and I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I do appreciate this. Thank you.
Those were very good
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Chair.
you.
Representative Minix, your question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to expound a little bit on Representative Orr's direction. Local conservation districts have a wide scope of responsibility. Septic tanks to terraces to lots of other areas. They're kind of the grassroots group that reports to you and KDHE and several other state organizations. Can you give us a little more description of the roles and responsibilities of local conservation board?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Our conservation districts do try to implement all different types of local, state, and federal programs. I think it's a very good point that you raised. They work with a vast number of just local partners. They work with their county sanitarians, and particularly on issues with on-site waste, septic systems that need some type of restoration, and through our non-point source program, we actually provide some cost share to help landowners, homeowners to fix those failing septic systems. As we look more towards the state level, I would hesitate to say that conservation districts answer to me. We work in very close partnership with conservation districts across the state. They are, their own government entity in and of themselves. But we do try to work very closely with conservation districts for the implementation of our programs. And I think you're right. It's generally seen that the Division of Conservation is the state arm of conservation districts across the state. Conservation districts are also absolutely crucial in implementing federal programs on the ground. And I hope that maybe at some point this committee gets to hear from our state conservationist, Karen Woodridge, about those federal programs. There's certainly a tremendous amount of funding that's available to the state of Kansas through those federal programs. But again, our conservation districts are very important in helping NRCS be able to efficiently and effectively implement those programs on the ground. And so, again, it is layered with partnerships, and there are other state agencies that implement programs through conservation districts across the state. A couple of programs that I might just quickly highlight. One is through funding from the state water plan that goes to the Kansas Water Office for what we call the Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative. And that program allows for some watershed implementation for practices that reduce sediment loading to just a few high priority reservoirs around the state. That money actually comes back to KDA and again runs through our cost share information management system and is implemented on the ground by local conservation districts. Another program is that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment utilizes our programs and county conservation districts to implement some of the RAPS funding in a number of watersheds across the state.
Thank you very much.
Next question is from Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and forgive me. I'm actually at home in Wichita trying to nurse a slight cold, and I just popped a cough drop in my mouth. Simple question. I noticed the programs for small lakes, and I know there are others. What is being done to address the issue of blue-green algae, and does that fall within your purview, or is there another area within the entire system that would try to deal with infestation of blue-green algae?
Yes, thank you for your question. And unfortunately, we see across the state that as nutrient enrichment occurs in our water bodies, that the conditions are created for these harmful algal blooms. And technically, it's not an algae; it's a cyanobacteria. And when the conditions are just right, and these cyanobacteria have an exponential growth event, they produce very powerful toxins. And when those events happen, they happen in a large enough scale that those toxins are actually, can be picked up from our water sampling. And so, the implementation of trying to stop some of those harmful algal blooms, particularly in a few of our federal reservoirs where we've had particular issues, does fall under, I think, my purview. And with our particular programs, I would specifically point to our non-point source program, as we see that all of these reservoirs in particular that experience harmful algal blooms all have eutrophication TMDLs. And so, that means we know that there's too many nutrients entering these reservoirs every year. And we're implementing these programs to try and reduce the amount of nutrient loading that occurs. Unfortunately, we also see harmful algal blooms on many of our smaller, municipally owned public water supply lakes. We see harmful algal blooms occur on a number of our watershed dams across the state. And unfortunately, we see harmful algal blooms in a lot of farm ponds across the state. Some of those smaller scale issues, our local conservation districts are certainly aware of and can try and help address those issues. But we really, I think from the divisions level, focus on those large federal reservoirs that are experiencing harmful algal blooms and how that is then impacting downstream water supplies. And that's one of the reasons, you probably heard me talk about Milford Reservoir associated with a number of our programs. And again, Milford Reservoir is a key component of the water supply for the entire Kansas River watershed. And so that becomes very important to our state, and consequently is somewhere where we put a tremendous amount of focus. I apologize, Representative Bishop. I think you're on mute there.
We cannot hear you. Still cannot hear you.
Am I now?
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm reading it backwards. Sorry about that. I know that this algae and high nutrient content in watershed areas, and particularly for ponds where um, homes have been developed around ponds in the drainage areas, and pets are dying, and these are causing quite a bit of concern. And I think I appreciate the way that you pointed out that there's a process there. It's not just the algae decides to grow, but is runoff and pollution that causes the sets it up for harmful activities in those watershed areas. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we have to have enough time to get through our bill that we're going to hear today. I have 3 listed. We'll go through those 3. And then if we have a lot more questions, we may have to invite you back. And we can do that if
That would be
you're
great.
able.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we have Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've answered most of my questions already because it still pertains to the watershed dams. Of course, in our area, we rely heavily on those structures to protect our reservoirs and all. When's the last new one that was actually constructed?
Yes, sir, and that's a very good question. There have been just a very few sporadically that have been constructed here in the past decade. And I will say that some of that issue is a bit out of our control. One of the things that has really happened to limit the implementation of those watershed structures across the state is some of the mitigation requirements from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Essentially what happens is when these watershed dams are constructed, we impact the stream that now sits underneath of that lake. And what the Army Corps of Engineers requires that we mitigate for the destruction of that habitat. The issue that we see is that the mitigation cost is very high. In fact, the mitigation cost can be equal to the cost of building the dam itself. That makes it cost prohibitive to build these structures. And so, again, we do try to work with the Corps on that issue. There are a number of different mitigation techniques that can be used. We have actually become, the division has gone through the process to be where we can hold conservation easements, and then these easements can be used to generate mitigation credits. And we've done that to try and reduce the cost to our watershed districts across the state in paying for that mitigation so that they can construct new dams. And so, yeah, it's a real issue. We're also working with our watershed districts to amend some of their general plans to where they include what we call minor works, but are in fact many of the agricultural best management practices that we implement with our other programs, so that those watershed districts can do everything they can to prolong the useful life of the dams that we already have in place. And so, yeah, it's a real issue. And again, we see flooding issues continue to plague our state, and yeah, we're going to keep working on that issue as hard as we can.
Thanks for your presentation and appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Riley.
Quick question. You mentioned about the working with the conservation districts and the 105 folks. That concerns as far as training and that kind of thing. So do you meet with those folks quarterly at different locations, pay for their training, get together and update them, that kind of thing, and build a camaraderie with those folks?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. One of our staff members within the Division of Conservation is tasked with some of the training to provide to new conservation district managers across the state. One of the organizations that I pointed out as well, the KACD employee organization, it also has responsibility for a number of the training steps that are provided to new district managers. And that's important because those are district managers themselves that are providing that training and helping to build that camaraderie. We do have a set of spring meetings and a set of fall meetings that occur from an area or kind of regional standpoint. And then once a year, we get together for the annual Kansas Association of Conservation Districts annual meeting. And we actually have that conference in Wichita currently. And again, a lot of district managers across the state come to that conference. You know, I think you hit on a very key point that, you know, conservation districts managers are in a lot of counties across the state a one-person show. And so making sure that there is that level of camaraderie, that they do feel part of a larger whole is very important to us. And certainly connecting with district managers from other counties is important. You know, engaging with us at the state level is very important. And, you know, I'll be quite honest with you, it's been very challenging for many district managers during the COVID-19 pandemic, as many of those USDA service centers have been closed. They, at least when they're in that office co-located with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, you know, they have other conservation professionals that they're interacting with. You know, when they're kind of stuck at home, trying to implement these programs, you know, really by themselves, it has been quite difficult. And you know, we're trying to provide support from our office as best we can. We do coordinate regularly with all of our conservation partners, and we do try to reach out to those district managers whenever we, you know, become aware that you know, they need a little pick-me-up. And so that's.
Thank you. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lyon. My question was in regard to your water conservation programs. You talked a lot about the retirement of water rights, and I was curious if you had additional programming for the more efficient use of water resources or promoting more efficient use of resources. You talked a little bit about your irrigation technology, and then we've heard a little bit about LEMAs, but I didn't know if there were other types of programs that promote that as well.
Yeah, and you know, again, I don't want to step on anyone else's toes. You know, the Kansas Water Office implemented a program or an initiative a handful of years ago called Water Technology Farms, and they really tried to engage with the private sector to really look at these technologies that not only are able to help us reduce water use and be more efficient with the water that we use, but become more profitable. Right, it's those market-based decisions that we need to really be able to implement and help producers learn about, because quite frankly, with our conservation programs, we're never going to have the funding to touch enough acres to truly make an impact. Those market-based solutions are really the future for us, really across all of our programs, particularly as it relates to irrigation technology, because these types of technologies do improve the profitability for the producer. And so at that point, you know, our funding really takes on that information and education component, and we're trying to spread the word. And so, again, that's maybe one example of a program that's out there. But we are working very diligently with private industry to try and spread the word about these technologies. I know an issue that has been before the legislature is rural broadband, and that plays a significant role in conservation, both being able to utilize these irrigation technologies and from the ability to implement our precision ag technologies on the landscape. And that, you know, those types of technologies make our conservation programs much more effective. And so again, a number of ways we're trying to work on that issue.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I had a whole list of questions also, but we just don't have time for all of them. So what I'm going to ask the committee to do is, if you have more questions, please submit them to the committee assistant. We'll combine them with mine and we'll send them over, and we'll ask them to answer those questions and send them back to us. So if you have more, please let us know and we'll send them over, and if need be, we'll invite him back. But we'll try the paper route first. And sir, thank you. Very informative. We appreciate your coming, and thank you very much. Now, committee, we have a bill that we are going to hear. It's a little bit odd because it's my bill, I will now turn the meeting over to the Vice Chair, and he will handle the bill hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will now have a informational hearing on House Bill 2005. This bill is excluding hot water supply boilers that have a nominal water capacity not exceeding 120 gallons from the provisions of the Boiler Safety Act. The first speaker will be
The revisor to explain it.
Oh, yes, and we'll have the revisor explain this. I'm new at this.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. My name's Kyle Hamilton. I'm with the Revisor's Office. And I want to start off my brief just by giving a little bit of general background on where some of this different language came from. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers published what's called the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code back in 1915. That code, it's been frequently updated ever since, and the point of it is to ensure safety of different vessels, ranging from just residential hot water heaters all the way up to nuclear reactors. And like many other states, Kansas has incorporated parts of that code into its boiler safety laws and regulations. Under Kansas's Boiler Safety Act, the state fire marshal oversees the inspection, installation, and repairs on all boilers and pressure vessels that are subject to the act. Certain hot water supply boilers or water heaters are not subject to the act. The language for that exemption can be seen on page 1 of the bill, starting on line 21. Under current law, hot water supply boilers that meet the other conditions of paragraph 5 and have a nominal water capacity that exceeds 85 gallons will be subject to the requirements of the Act. If the hot water supply boiler is within an electrical utility generating plant, it must exceed 120 gallons for the Act to apply. The amendment would strike the reference to 85 gallons and strike the reference to electrical utility generating plants and apply the larger 120 gallon threshold to all hot water supply boilers. The language being removed was actually added to subparagraph C back in 1998. And this change would revert the provision back to its originally enacted form from 1977. This is the only substantive change in the bill. The other markups are just technical changes. House Bill 2005 would become effective upon publication in the Kansas Register. Our other presenters, they'll be able to add maybe some more context to these changes and explain how the provisions are enforced, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can. Thank you.
Kyle, we will start with the proponents. No. Okay, certainly. Are there any questions for Kyle? I see no hands. Are there any hands in the room? Kyle, we thank you. We'll be referring back to you when necessary. We'll start with the proponents. I'll ask Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. As with most bills that we see in the legislature, it comes from one of our constituents has a problem and they come to us. Full disclosure, I have a hotel in Wamego and they came to me with a problem. They have water heaters that are 95 gallons, so they exceed that lower limit. And an inspector from the state fire marshal's office inspected them and was requiring them to make all kinds of changes in their facility. And so they came to me, and we've been working on this for well over a year now. I'm not going to read this to you, But we just changed it from 85 gallons up to 200, or 120 gallons for the maximum. Their water heaters are 95, and this will give some buffering. But for hotels, motels, and restaurants all over the state, this is a huge issue because the water heaters now are larger than that 85 gallons. So we made these minor changes, and the revisor, Kyle, did all the work on this, and I appreciate that. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Highland, I appreciate this bill coming forward because we see a lot of these heated floors in shops utilizing a lot more than just even 120. They're using multiple smaller water heaters so they can get past that.
Right.
And so I think this is a good step in forwarding this. So I appreciate you bringing this up. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
And by definition, boilers are for the production of steam for using that energy some other way, electrical production, whatever. And these obviously are not producing steam.
Representative Murphy.
I guess as much as anything, just had a comment. We've got a bed and breakfast that we operate out of our home, but it's very large, and I have a 105-gallon water heater, and you know, looks very safe, and I don't see any issues with this. And because of our situation, we didn't run into this problem, but I can see yet. Yeah. So anyway, so no, I appreciate this, and I think this is a good move.
Thank you.
Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious, what was the fire marshal's objections and recommendations for that particular instance in the hotel?
I think we'll have him here as a speaker very shortly. Why don't we let him answer that?
We will, but I'll also share with you that we contacted their office, and the inspector was fairly new, and common sense took a holiday. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Minnix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question. Does this apply even to like our nursing homes? I became aware several years ago that within a single nursing home, there were 5 different hot water heater or boiler systems. They required different temperatures in the client's rooms or the janitor's closet or in the kitchen. So there was like 5 separate hot water systems within this one facility. And your bill, I understand it applies to residential and businesses. Does it also apply to governmental units such as nursing homes?
I'm not comfortable answering that question. I think we'll leave that for the state fire marshal, who will be testifying.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I see none. Thank you, Mr. Havitt. We also have written testimony, I believe, from, is Mr. Dromboski, is he online? Okay. We have written testimony that I hope you have read. The State Fire Marshal, Mr. Jorgensen, is he going to be with us today?
I am.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the committee's time today, and I'm well aware of the issues that happened with the hotel in Wamego. It's not the first time we've had those, and but with the change in the bill, it'll probably minimize more in the future. Currently, the state regulations require us to inspect hot water heaters that are basically 85 gallons or larger, unless they're electric, and then the limit starts at 120. Our office doesn't have any issues or concerns with increasing that limit to 120 for all hot water heaters in the state. We've reached out to there's about a dozen insurance companies that do business in the state. And as part of their policies, they also do those type of inspections and then submit their reports to us. And then we oversee their inspection process and their training, and we let them do a lot of those inspections for us. And I've reached out to probably 4 or 5 of those companies. They have no issue with increasing the limit to 120 gallons on all hot water heaters. In fact, they say it sort of brings us in line with other states and current industry standards going forward. The only other information I have for the committee is it will have a little bit of a fiscal impact. It'll reduce the amount of funds coming into the boiler fee fund by, we estimate, around $80,000 a year. Those particular units in that 85 to 120 gallon range, they're only inspected every 3 years. It's not an annual inspection. On the fiscal note, we broke out for the committee the number of those units in the state, how many we do, how many the insurance companies do, that they're on a 3-year cycle. But again, no issues from our office and no issues from most of or any of the insurance companies that we contacted in changing that limit to 120 gallons. And one question that I did hear, and I made a quick note, is we do not inspect anything residential wise. So most of the state rules and regulations do not pertain to 1 and 2 family dwellings. So this would have no effect on the size of hot water heater somebody might have in their house. It's strictly on the commercial side.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen. Just a couple of technical questions. I was curious if there was a reason that 120 gallons was chosen, if that's just a consistent size used by many commercial entities. And then for these commercial heaters, are there standards for routine maintenance or things just to make sure that they continue to be safe in the long term?
That's part of the inspection cycle and why we inspect them every 3 years, just to make sure that the maintenance is being kept up. I think the main issue that happened in Wamego is that the company that actually did the installation wasn't aware of the requirements. And so I think that's where a lot of the problem came from. But again, with changing the size to 120 gallon, there won't be any requirements on installation, on the piping, on those things like that. So moving this to 120 gallons takes care of a lot of those issues that some of the representatives have voiced concern with, and should help expedite the hot water, I guess, installation and sales and use across the state, at least on the commercial side.
Can I ask a follow-up, if that's okay?
Yes, you sure can. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, on the safety side of things for the consumers or whoever would be, using that water heater, I was just curious if there are, safety standards, or since these specific entities wouldn't be subject to the, maintenance every 3 years or those checks through your office, are there other ways to ensure that it continues to meet standards and is safe for consumers?
Actually not, unless you get to some of the larger metro areas who have maybe adopted their own rules and regs on hot water heaters. They might be more stringent than what the state ones are. And I'm not sure, how each municipality does that. But if we're changing a state statute, even the municipalities would have to come in line with the 120 gallon limit, because they can't do anything rules or regulation wise that goes against a standing state statute. So it'll reduce the installation requirements. It'll take away any any service or inspection for safety or anything going forward unless it's 120 gallons or more.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Jorgensen, does this apply to governmental units such as nursing homes and office buildings the same as it does to all commercial?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Representative Haswood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Jorgensen. I have two questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned there were several states that have implemented this statute. Can you give us those states, and why are some municipalities not making the conversion to 125?
Well, again, that's up to individual cities and the rules and regs that they pass. So we actually have no control over what the cities or counties decide to do on their rules and regulations. But again, a change in the statute would actually force the cities and counties to adhere to the 120 gallon, the new 120 gallon limit, because they can't go against anything that's in a statute. They can go against anything we have in our rules and regs, but they can't go against what's in state statute. So if the bill goes forward, all the local municipalities and counties that maybe regulate hot water heaters, they'll also have to adopt the new 120 gallon limit. And on the other states, I could probably do a little bit of research, but I think the reviser mentioned at the beginning that the codes that we've adopted, the rules and regs that we adopt in the state, they're a national standard. They're just not something that we've come up with. So they look a lot alike from state to state because all the states tend to adopt them and try and keep them the same if they can. But I'm not sure where other states are on the 85 to the 120 gallon limit. I only know that the insurance companies have no issue with it. And they said it sort of brings it up to current industry standards and brings us in line with other states that in the area that they're aware of that they do work into.
Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen, and thank you, Vice Chairman.
I see no further questions. Yes, Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on commercial buildings that are new construction. I'm assuming that they would still have building inspectors that would come out and make sure that those boilers and so on are being installed properly with the proper piping and all that sort of thing before they're cleared to pass code inspections. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. A lot of the larger boilers in the state, we do inspect annually, just because there is a propensity for issues with them if they go a year or two and haven't been serviced properly. And it's the same with new construction, which we're having quite a bit of right now. So in the fiscal note, I mentioned that we might be reducing our boiler inspectors by a position, but with the amount of new construction that we're seeing, we have a lot of new units out there that we're getting called on daily that we need to get out and take a look at so that they can start operating those units and opening up those businesses. So I think some of the inspections that we're losing on the 85 to 120 gallons, which is I think a little bit over 600 a year, we're going to pick up a pretty big chunk of those with new construction and new facilities across the state.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions, Mr. Jorgensen, we appreciate your presence here today, answering our questions. Are there any other that would like to testify on this issue? Then I believe, Mr. Chairman, that concludes it.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Just one update. I've had questions from some of the members about how we're going to vote in committee. And I had a plan in place, but like everything in the Capitol, it was being ferreted, or not ferreted, it was being reviewed by the revisor's office. And they did get back with me, and I will outline that and send everybody the same instructions for how we will be voting in committee. You have to be in the building, number one. But from there, there's some details that I will flesh out and share that with you. So we'll probably be voting on this bill next week, one of the days. So get ready. It's an easy one. Come on, folks. Anything else for the good of the committee? If not, we are adjourned.